So hello, everyone. Thank you, IBM, for putting this on. It's been a fascinating event, and it's been great to listen to the talks that have gone before. I'm going to move the conversation on a little bit to a different part of the supply chain. So when product moves between stakeholders, between physical locations. So we call this the in-transit part of the supply chain, if you like. Now, this is a pretty scary statistic, and it's the most up-to-date statistic that I've come across. But 69% of companies claim to have limited, or even worse, no visibility across the supply chain. And this is particularly true when we talk about products moving between different companies, right? These are separate organizations. Now, why is this important from a sustainability point of view? Well, this part of the supply chain and visibility into it is critical for mitigating delay, mitigating disruption, communication between the various organizations that are involved. Ultimately, it's key in driving down waste, physical waste, lost time, time on the road, all of these things that we're all fighting against in our sort of collective visibility effort. And as I've said, Entopy focuses on this specific area. And there's a very good reason, because it's a very difficult area for businesses to gain visibility over. Again, I'll ask the question, why? Well, it's very difficult to gain visibility of product moving through someone else's network, right? How do you get visibility over stuff that's moving through someone else's warehouse? IoT has long been seen as the answer to this problem, right? So fitting smart boxes to stuff moving through someone else's network. And there's good reason for that, because IoT technology offers a sort of single solution for a single stakeholder to gain visibility over products moving through someone else's or outside of one's jurisdiction. But these technologies, they bring about their own challenges. First of all, cost is typically prohibitive. Furthermore, the technology that creates this new data, if you like, brings about challenges of its own, such as, operational challenges, such as retrieving devices and doing this, that, and the other. And it only provides a single source of data. I mean, the whole conversation today has been about collating data from lots of different places to provide a complete picture. Even if IoT technology is successful in this part of the supply chain, it's only providing a single piece of the puzzle. Rather than generating new data to solve this problem, we should look to generate or leverage the data that exists across the supply chain. You see, across the many, many, many organizations that are involved in the transit of goods between A and B, there is a huge amount of data being generated within those organizations, within those systems. The challenge is this data sits in silos, right? So it sits in silos across many independent organizations, very different types of system. The challenge is, how do we get the information out of these organizations? Kind of common theme, I think, going throughout the presentations. But how do we get the data out of these organizations in a way that delivers some sort of coherent visibility? Well, Entopy's looked at this challenge in this specific area, and there's a number of challenges that are slightly different, I suppose, to the sort of cotton visibility challenge. I mean, here we're talking about real-time data that's dynamic. It's happening, it's changing all of the time. And you only need the visibility for a sort of temporary sort of period, while something's actually happening. What we do is we sort of sit across the various systems that are in play, and we sort of we call it the conductor role, right? Because of the data orchestration piece. But essentially, we're capturing and combining data to create a digital twin of a consignment, right? The digital twin is central to everything we do. It provides a fixed schematic or ontology of how we actually map the data that we're collecting. So this allows us to work with very, very different data types and very dynamically. The data that we're sourcing, we look to leverage data from existing domains for a very, very clear and obvious reason. It's trusted data. These systems are used day to day by the businesses that own them, and therefore we can trust the data quality. We know that these systems are well maintained. But of course, you can't just sit there and hoover up information. This is one of the challenges that people come across, right? In this part of the supply chain, we're not dealing with the challenge of a document that's been written down and stored in a cupboard. We're dealing with data privacy between organizations, right? So you can't just sit there and hoover up information. It has to be targeted in the way that you're capturing and collecting it, and what you're doing with it needs to be transparent. So we've developed proprietary algorithms that essentially write policies in real time to each twin, that govern, don't worry, it's just gone onto some screensaver, it just sort of, I thought that was my slide, that govern data capture, right? So this allows us to be very, very targeted in what data we're pulling out and when. So if you like, as we sort of fill up that twin, we're creating rules that determine how we capture the next piece of information. The connections with those systems are typically through secure APIs, but agreeing with pretty much every talk that's gone before, you have to be incredibly flexible with how you talk to the domain. The key principle we're talking about here is essentially domain ownership. They've got the data, it sits there, they're the guys maintaining it, they should be in charge of how they communicate that information with us. We shouldn't determine or dictate how they work with us. And we provide a series of tools that enable transparency across this network. Data is obviously processed, cleaned, mapped to a digital twin, and we have a validation engine that essentially means that we're delivering consistent data products each time. And this isn't blockchain, right? So I've heard blockchain mentioned a lot, and I agree that this technology is very, very powerful. But in this instance, we need to be very dynamic. The twins will change all of the time. The key thing with blockchain is the word immutable. It can't change. You put something in it, it's fixed. What we're doing here is we're creating a digital twin that we're constantly updating with data as stuff happens to it as it's moving between A and B. The result is these rich data products. These are brand new data products that contain all of the relevant information that one would need to interact with regarding an individual consignment. Another key thing here is these are independent data products within our platform, right? So we can control access at a digital twin level. This means we can provide visibility to multiple stakeholders on a permissions basis to complete data products that hold all of the information they need regarding a consignment that's moving through their network. Now, when I was talking about dynamically updating twins, what I'm talking about is the addition of real-time data to these objects, right? So let's take a scenario. If we go back, we've got all of this information that constitutes our digital twin. This is what we're tracking, right? So we know where it's going to, where it's going from, supporting documentation, its inventory, all of that sort of stuff. To start to understand what's going on in the in-transit part of the supply chain, we need to start to add real-time information. The obvious one is GPS, right? How are we going to get GPS if we don't have a tracker fitted to it? Well, we can use the trusted data from the various domains, such as combining data from an order management system and a transport management system to determine which vehicle that consignment is on. And then we can start to leverage data that exists in the supply chain now to tell us where that vehicle is. We can combine that information with analytics and geofences, and that enables us to capture events. So you start to build out what we call consignment lifecycle records. They capture key points or key events throughout the consignment lifecycle. So it's checked into this warehouse, it's checked out of this warehouse, it's got to its destination, etc. And these events can be used to communicate this information across the supply chain. So they can help operators to be more aware of what's happening or what's coming at them. They can be used to drive automation. I heard the question earlier on. Automation will be event driven. It's when something happens and that triggers the transfer of information between systems. At the end of the consignment lifecycle, we spin the twin down in Entopy, right? So we purposely get rid of it. So this data is, when I talk about it being dynamic, you've got this kind of scenario where twins pop up and then they sort of do something and then we get rid of it. We do that on purpose because we don't want to hold any data within our platform for longer than it's operationally required. But there is some value in retaining this information, right? So we've built a very detailed, highly granular record of what's happened to a consignment as it's moved through a supply chain network. These records can be analyzed collectively, okay? So you can use these consignment lifecycle records and you can pass those over to an analyst team, and it gives them a much richer data set from which to derive macro insights, not just the kind of micro operational insights. So these are really, really powerful things. And in the instance where data should be retained, we would simply write it to a separate data warehouse. So yeah, this part of the supply chain, it's not to be forgotten. I think the sourcing element will naturally move into what happens domestically and I suppose closer to home across Europe in terms of those in-transit legs. But yeah, it has a very key role, I think, to play in our collective sustainability effort. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. Cheers.